Welcome to part 2 of my series on finding vacant land in Ontario. In this one, we're going to discuss some of the do's and don'ts of Crown land and talk a little bit about finding land that abuts Crown land. I'm going to put timestamps in the description, so if you want to jump to anything, then it's down there for you. I have a feeling this video is probably going to end up being a little bit long. At the beginning of our property search, I was all about finding property that abutted Crown land, because in my mind, I was thinking that it's just like a whole bunch of extra property that's now mine. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. So that's one of the things we're going to discuss a little bit later on in this video. Crown land is property that is owned by the government of Canada. It's managed by the Ministry of Natural Resources. It's not owned by any one single person. It's kind of owned by every Canadian. It's public land, so anybody can go and use it within the parameters that we're allowed. Some of the public uses would be like camping, which there are some rules we'll talk about in a bit. You can go hunting on it as long as you have all your appropriate licenses and tags if needed. You can go fishing on it. You'll likely notice a little bit later as we peruse the Crown Land Atlas, which is how you find out where the Crown Land is in Ontario. Shorelines are often Crown Land, and the riverbeds and lake beds are also Crown land. So effectively, lakes are public. If you can access the lake without trespassing on private property, like if you can go through Crown land or a public road, then there's no reason why you can't go on that lake. But keep in mind, if you buy a property that has lakefront, there's a possibility that your shoreline might actually be Crown land. And so if you wanted to build a dock, you would have to get a permit and permission in order to do that. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about is actually some of the uses for Crown land for the general public. Whether you don't have to own property around it, just you want to go camping, for example, you are allowed to go camping on Crown land. There are some conditions to it, and we'll talk about those a little bit here. So camping is free on most Crown lands in Ontario, including Crown lands covered by water. Limits for camping on Crown land: you can only spend a maximum of 21 days in one site in a calendar year. So it's kind of funny because you can just move your campsite like 100 meters from the previous one, and then you're fine for another 21 days. But you will see that there will be some restrictions. This is all, I don't want to talk too much on this because this is stuff you can look up. I'll keep it all linked in I will put links for all of this in the description so that you can deep dive it a little bit more on your own, because I want to touch over a kind of a broad spectrum of topics. Campfires is something we're actually going to talk a little bit more about too. Finding the camping locations, I will get into the Crown Land Atlas further down the line in this video. So you're allowed to have a campfire on your Crown Land if you're camping, as long as they're allowed in the area. So when you go into an area, they'll typically tell you if it's like safe to burn, if you're only allowed to burn at night, or if there's a total fire ban. And that happens, especially in the summertime. In the wintertime, it's usually you're pretty well open to just burn whenever you feel like it, within reason. In the summertime, you might sometimes have to get a permit for day burning, but that's not really anything to do with Crown land, even though those rules still apply. So when you drive by and see the big signs saying whether burning's permitted or not, that's going to apply to you, even if you're just a non-resident camping. As a general rule, you can't build on Crown land for personal use. There are exceptions, and I'll outline those here. So you can apply to rent or buy the Crown land. For example, like if the property that you were looking to purchase was only accessible through Crown land and there wasn't already a road through it, then you would have to apply to the ministry in order to get access, so that you would build that road through Crown land to access your property. So it's just, that's a thing to keep in mind. Typically, if you want to get a permit in order to build on Crown land, it's got to be in line with the ministry's plans and policies. So you can see those on this website, which I'll link below. And then here, I guess, is the part that's of the most relevance, is what is not going to be considered. If you want to build a new home or like a cottage or a hunt camp that's just for you alone, then you just can't do that on Crown land. I have seen in my search, I've seen like big areas of crown land that cover like hundreds of acres. And then there's a hunt camp, but the hunt camp was a business that was run. So they had permission to build that camp, and they ran a business, like basically a tourism business, that you come to this hunt camp and then they facilitate a hunt, show you how it's done. So that's something that was like commercial tourism. So it made sense with their policies. It was approved. That was a legal building on crown land. So shorelines are often crown land, not every time, just often. Like if the land is not yours, if there's just like a random shoreline and you're like, oh, well, this is public, so I can go use this beach, yes, you can. But if you wanted to like put a dock on that and you don't own any of the land that abuts it, then the ministry is not, they're just not going to approve that. It's just not happening for you. Here they're talking about costs associated. I'm not going to dig that deep. I've got other stuff to cover, so let's move on. So some of the things that are going to require approval on crown land, because you can't build, you also can't cut new trails or roads without permission. So if you want to access like your own landlocked property, for example, you can't be clear cutting a path to your property. You need permission to do something like that. So get permission. Moving on, that's way too much time has been spent on something I wasn't going to spend any time on. This map is something that's going to be very relevant to the rest of my video. So everything that is in that kind of brownish gray is all northern boreal forest. Everything I'm about to say does apply to them, but I'm mainly talking to the people in the green and the blue section. So if you look at this line's a little bit jagged, that's all because of different townships. So if you're unsure, if you're near this line, then you can just kind of take this map, zoom in on your own township, and just kind of guess. If you're unsure, just contact like the local authority and ask if you're in the managed forest zone or if you're in the Great Lakes region. Because in the managed forest zone, you get to do some extra stuff on crown land that you don't get to do when you're just in the Great Lakes, Southern Ontario region. And it's something that's really good to know about. So the main reason for this map is that I want to talk about harvesting wood. And that was the reason that I was really I wanted to have property that abutted crown land. My goal was always to have 10 acres or more, but I was willing to go a little bit down. And I believe I mentioned this in my first video. I was willing to go a little bit down on that if my land abutted crown. And it's because of this reason. You can harvest wood for personal use from crown land if you're in the managed forest region. So there's a lot to this, and if this is like super exciting to you like it was for me, I highly recommend reading through the whole thing to make sure that you know exactly what you're talking about before you go out there and start doing it. Again, links will be in the description. You can go on without having to ask for permission from anybody. If you are in the managed forest region, you can go onto crown land and you can collect up to 10 cubic meters or full stacked cords of downed wood, meaning that it's dead and it's on the ground already. You're not chopping anything over. So you can collect that and take it. That's a significant amount of wood. A cord is, like a full cord of wood is, if you were to chop it and stack it, it would be 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide, 8 feet long. That's a lot of wood. You can do this like that much wood 4 times. So you would have to keep track of what you're cutting so that you can prove it if there was any sort of issue with it. So depending on where you are in the managed forest region, you can cut down one Christmas tree that is a maximum of 2.5 meters. That ends up basically being like an 8-foot tall Christmas tree. That's pretty decent. North of the French Mattawa River only. So that's kind of north of this area. Another one that's really cool, you could transplant up to 5 trees that are a maximum of 1.4 meters or like 4.5 feet tall. You can cut branches from standing trees if the branches are a maximum of 7.5 centimeters or like just under 3 inches in diameter, as long as the removal of those branches won't kill the tree. And you could also collect firewood as long as it's already downed dead wood on the ground, or it's a dead tree that's standing and you can cut that down. That is only for when you're lawfully camping on crown land for immediate use. So that's the difference where the Great Lakes, Southern Ontario area. So Great Lakes, Southern Ontario can only collect campfire wood while they're camping on Crown land for immediate use, and it can only be downed wood or a like dead wood, like a dead standing tree that you cut down. Has to be dead already. You cannot kill a tree. So some of the conditions of being able to do that is that you have to be at least 16 years old. You can only harvest on Crown land. You can find the Crown land by using the Crown Land Atlas. You cannot harvest in provincial parks or conservation areas, on private land, First Nations reserved, on federal land. If there's a forestry management incentive already happening on the land, like they're already cutting down trees or they're just logging, like the government is logging, then that is not for you. You step away from that. You do not get to harvest wood from that piece of Crown land. You cannot be transporting this outside of Ontario, and the wood that you collect cannot be sold. It is only for your personal use in your private home. They do prefer if you collect only from your area. That's like they don't want you transporting trees from one part of Ontario to another. Like Ontario is obviously quite vast, and there might be some sort of a disease or a pest that's in your wood that you cut down over here, and then all of a sudden you're bringing it over there and spreading it. So keep it in your area. You cannot use heavy equipment, any sort of like tractors or skidders, whatever the skidder is. Just like minimal on the equipment. You're not bringing heavy equipment in there. You cannot cut a path in order to get to more trees. If you can't walk to it, too bad. If there's wood that's just already been stacked, like it's like a miracle, you walk into the Crown land and there's stacked wood already, that's not for you. Don't touch it. And then you have to clean up your mess. So if you've made a mess on roadways or on a trail, you got to tidy that up. You also have to keep in mind that you cannot park on a highway and then run into Crown land and then just start chopping down trees and throw them on the back of your truck. You cannot impede traffic, so you still have to abide by the rules of the road for where you're going to park in order to access it. So you are only allowed to do the campfire wood collection thing in the Great Lakes region on Crown land, but there are some workarounds if you are native. So you can look into that if that's something that interests you or applies to you. Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982, Aboriginal or treaty rights. In there's a little bit further explanation where you might be able to do some of the things that non-native people can't do in the Great Lakes region, but native people can do. That's something, again, look into it. I'm just here to tell you that this is there. I'm not here to tell you what to do. So we'll leave it at that, because that's the cool part. So there's a little bit more stuff if you want to get authorization, then you're allowed to do a little bit more, and there's explains how to get authorization. That's beyond what I plan on talking about today. So I showed you how to find property lines in my last video. Now I'm going to show you how to find Crown land. So the one and only tool that I'm aware of is the Crown Land Atlas. And I'll put, again, links below. So this is the web page. You open it up to a disclaimer. And then here is the map you're getting. So again, that's the boreal area. We're not really going to discuss that too much. All of this gray here is private property. Anything that is in the yellow like this, that is Crown land. One of the things I want to point out is keeping in mind that the gray is private and yellow is public. You can kind of see the sort of shape here is similar to the map here. You will find Crown land in the Southern Ontario Great Lakes region. There's just not nearly as much of it as in the managed forest zone. So, for example, let me zoom in here. So you can see like there's a chunk right there, right near Lake Simcoe. That is Lake Simcoe. You can see that the managed forest zone is way north of that. So these guys right here, that's all Crown land. So you're not, like, you don't have to go too far north to find Crown land. That's the point I'm trying to get at. So this area here, you can see there's all sorts of different colors on the map. So if you are unsure, then you can go to your map layers and then go legend. And then so this Chartreuse kind of green, which you can see down here, is conservation reserve. Provincial park is in that minty green. General use area, they mean public land. General use area means crown land. Pretty much the best way to go about using it is you just kind of zoom in. The Crown Land Atlas doesn't give as detailed information when it comes to property lines. So I like to start in the topographic map, make sure I know exactly where I'm trying to look, and then from there, find out if there's crown land anywhere near that property. So, and I'll show you a couple examples of that with other things that I want to talk about. So you can see the yellow here is the crown. All this gray here is private. If you want it, if it's not quite clear enough for you, then you can hit the layers button, and then where you find crown land data, there's a toggle. You can just up it and it makes it really stand out. It kind of takes everything else away, so you can really get a clear idea of what exactly you're dealing with. These gray lines here, those are all these are unopened road allowances technically, and then this is a shoreline which kind of falls into the same category. There's a couple things that kind of came up when we were doing our property hunt. So back in the day, before we ever actually started physically going places, this is kind of why I started sleuthing so hard, to make sure that everything was checking out okay. Because I would find things like this one. This is a former listing. It's not a listing anymore. They took it down. But this triangle here went up for sale like a couple years back. They've listed it a few times. I actually kind of keep my eye out for it because I find it kind of funny when they post it. I don't know. So they posted selling this piece of property, which is all well and good. And there's like a really nice cabin that was being sold with the property. But then when I went to see where the property was and find the property lines, I did not see the cabin. So I was like, well, what's going on? This is all crown land. So when you take that Ontario Imagery, then you see, oh, there's a cabin there. That cabin should not be there. That is the cabin that they were selling with this piece of property. And this is why you got to be careful when you're shopping around, because people will do sketchy things like this. This should never have been built there. They literally owned this property. They could have built on their property. It's a huge selling feature for a lot of people that thing abuts crown land, but then here they are building where they shouldn't be building. I highly doubt that they had approval to build this, because it was built like a home, like a cottage, and it's clearly they're not running a business out of it. So it's a personal use building. I'm not sure all the legalities of it. Like, I don't know if I went there, would I have access to that because it's on public land? That stuff I do not know. But I do know that building should not be there, and that them selling it is just so grossly inappropriate, saying that like this property has this building on it. It's not the case. So you have to watch out for stuff like this. We never went to this one because that's a waste of my time. Another one that we did go to, which looked beautiful on paper, and again, this is the difference, and I pulled this one specifically as well because this is as good as your property lines are going to look on the Crown Land Atlas. But when you go into the topographic map, this is the subject property. All of these lines, you're not going to find any of this detailed information on the Crown Land Atlas, which is why I'm such a huge fan of the topographic map, because how would I know? How would I know where the property was for real? And that the subject property actually abuts Crown Land if I didn't know where the property lines were. So in this one's case, there is this weird jet in from the neighbor. There's a house. There's a true proper house here. This was the property we're looking at. It was vacant land. So when we went to it, there's no access in. There's no driveway. So we just kind of parked as tight as we could and walked in. And in about this point, there's just so much junk. There's so much junk. And we're just like, okay, that's extreme. And then around where that little jut happens, where that little outcrop, I don't know what you'd call it, where that is, we had a name for it, but I'm not going to share that name. Where that is, there was a little road leading into the Crown land. So we're just like, okay, whatever, no big deal. They've been walking across. Not the end of the world. This is 10 acres or so. So we walk down and we come to the road, and we're just a little bit confused because of the amount of stuff on this property. There was a trailer, there was scaffolding, there was a boat. And we didn't even really understand how they were getting that stuff onto the property because there's no access from the road. So we thought maybe it was that road led out through the Crown land to the main road. So we're like, well, that would be a bonus. Started walking it. So somewhere in there, I can find it for real. Yeah, you know what, we will. Because I'm obsessed with the topographic map. If you didn't watch my first video about the topographic map, watch it because it's so handy. So there is the house on the neighboring lot. You can see that there's nothing on this property. You can't quite see the road. It's right here. And if you keep going, then, oh, where is it? Then you'll see a little box. That's a little like trapper cabin. So we're walking down that road and we're like, oh, there's somebody here. We didn't know for sure where the property lines ended, we didn't know for sure where the Crown land ended. So we're like, well, that might be someone's private property, so we can't go any further. Let's back up. And as we were walking away, I guess the fella that was in there heard us. So the guy that lives here, he was in the trapper cabin, so he came driving down in his like Argo with his gun in his lap and starts talking to us, and we let him know that we have permission to be there. Like, we were looking at the property for sale, and we started asking some questions about it, and he seemed like he was being nice, telling us about it and saying that it's the owner's junk and that it needs to get cleaned up because it's horrible. And we start talking about the land itself, and he starts telling us that everything, and this is the thing that makes Crown land maybe not always the best thing to have against your property. You're going to want to know who's on it. Anybody can access it. So you want to make sure that it's something that a situation like this isn't happening. This fella has to go through the subject property in order to access the Crown land because he's not going out on the road. There is no way to get into it from there. This is all like a rock face. So this guy's cut a section or cut a road through the halfway mark of our property, has the gall to tell us that the property that's for sale is only this side. Let me switch it back over. To tell this is all that's for sale and that this is actually Crown land, which, as you can see, that is not the case. The Crown land is all down here. This is private. This is what was for sale. Right there, all for sale. So tells us this is all that's for sale, and then as we kind of like processed it and drove away, and I got home and I checked out where the property lines actually were, and we realized this man was just lying through his teeth. It's a good thing to know about the whole human factor. And actually, we walked this property for one of our updates, our second update, when we were walking around in the woods, and it was the leaves were too crunchy. If that's a video you want to check out, take a look. And I say at the end of it that the human factor was too high, and this is before we met the man. Oh, that was the other thing. So when he rolled up on us with his shotgun, he was warning us that he had been firing it like kind of like whatever haphazardly. So that's why like we went to that property not really thinking about the fact that it was hunting season, and after that when we were like, we need to get hunter orange vests and we're going to rock them until we know what's going on in the neighborhood, because this man was essentially he was threatening us, letting us know that he had been firing off his gun, even though we never heard a gun when we were there. You're not that far away, we would have heard it, but he was just saying that he was firing off his gun like willy-nilly. So we're just like, okay, this is not who we want as a neighbor. We are going to have a hell of a time reclaiming that land, even though it is technically, it would have been ours if we'd purchased that property. I feel bad for the seller. They're never going to sell this land. Unless it's to that man, which I'm sure after years of taking advantage of it, he's not going to put any money out for it. And the guy was a bit of a piece of work, we'll say. But anyway, so it's a good thing to keep in mind with Crown land. You are going to get people on that crown land. That crown land is not actually yours. You're just allowed to use it. And in a case like this one, he was going so far above and beyond what you should be doing with crown land that it was just like grossly inappropriate. Like the amount of stuff he'd kind of pushed onto it, building on it again without permission. That's his own private trapper cabin. It's not supposed to be there. And honestly, because of how much he ended up lying to us, I had half a mind to call M&R on him, but just to be petty, I never did. A big thing for us is that our property, we want a good chunk of our property to remain forested, and then the plan is to just kind of work trails through the land. So having crown land be right beside us is really appealing because we can go through and do that and not disturb anything, which is our intention. Just kind of clear away some of the dead wood to make our trail between the trees that are already up there and just kind of manage it a little bit. And then in the process, we would get a little bit of free like bonfire wood from the downed wood. So it just seemed like all winning until we went to the Glamorgan Road property and found out that it's not all rainbows and sunshine on Crown land. If you're liking the videos in this series, I do have one more planned to go along with the Finding Vacant Land in Ontario, and that is to do with unorganized townships. So if that's something that interests you, please like my videos, please subscribe, and let me know that that's something that you want to see more of.